Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications and host of StrategyCast. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. Last week, we started a two-part series on RevOps and discussed implementing key strategies and process. Today, we're tackling a challenge that many organizations face, effectively managing and optimizing their RevOps teams. Despite the critical role, companies often struggle with the data bias, misalignment between marketing and sales, and the underutilization of AI tools. These challenges can lead to inefficiencies and missed opportunities in the sales process. To help us navigate these complexities, I'm joined by Jeff Marcoux, a seasoned expert in RevOps strategy. Jeff will share his insights on overcoming these hurdles, aligning teams, and leveraging AI to create more efficient data-driven processes. We're unlocking the full potential of your RevOps teams to help you drive your organization's success and growth. And don't forget to check out the most recent issue of the StrategyCast newsletter on StrategyCast.com. Just like this episode, it's full of inspiration and a ton of ideas that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to StrategyCast. I am so excited to have Jeff Marcoux join the show today. Jeff is an absolute wizard when it comes to marketing and RevOps and sales and kind of pushing it all together and creating incredible programs for many, many brands. He's a fractional CMO who's held many, many gigs. Welcome to StrategyCast.
You are too kind with that. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here today.
Well, I tell you, I'm excited to have you on the show. This is a long time coming, and we've been talking about RevOps recently on the show. And what I love about today's topic is we're going to dive into answering the question, is your RevOps team biased? And how we might be able to cut through some of that, and then how you fix the problem once you determine if they are or they aren't. Most of them, they have a little bias. Before we get there, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Gosh, yeah. No, I've been marketing for a very long time now, starting way back in early days of marketing automation. I worked at a company that really focused in the Microsoft Dynamics ecosystem part of the world and helped with really fun companies like New York Jets and Weight Watchers build out their marketing automation and carry that forward years and years, tours of Microsoft and in the BPO space and consulting spaces and all that kind of stuff. But what's always strung through across my career journey was always just this need for analytics and understanding, but then also being able to take that and partner with sales. Because it's only, if you're only looking at one side of the coin in terms of the data, marketers tend to get very defensive. But then also sales often likes to blame marketing, right? If they're coming up short on their numbers. And I always just found that data element tried to tell the truth as you went through it. But having now been attending conferences for decades, I feel like we still get back to this back and forth finger pointing between these two across that. But, across everything that I've done from early when I was an individual contributor to being a CMO and fractional consulting with all kinds of clients, both, publicly traded down to small hypergrowth startups, this RevOps data conundrum always seems to come up.
Right. Do you think that CRO titles are creating less bias today between sales and marketing and really help create more, harmony so that those two departments aren't working in silos?
So it's interesting. I have seen it work really well. this concept of a revenue organization or go-to-market organization, because I would argue they should potentially even have like churn, customer success, those kinds of things that can often fall into product or a separate group there. But the issue is where they come from and their kind of their point of view as they go through that. Because I've seen a lot of CROs in my consulting, working with clients, and in my own journey where they were just a glorified sales VP. And they're sales and they happen to get marketing. Marketing just does whatever sales asks them to, is kind of what it means. That's kind of camp one. I've also seen some amazing CROs and worked with some that truly look holistically, not just on that motion there. So I think it's not a one size fits all answer there, where it's the concept is right, but the problem is, what's the point of view of the person coming in? If they're truly a revenue officer, it's going to be about, reducing churn, customer expansion, in addition to growing the brand. And rarely will you hear a CRO talk about the brand and all that motion and all the great stuff we hear from companies like Sixth Sense and that stuff of, building that pipeline. And so it really depends on their point of view. So I've seen it be disastrous when marketing reports into it, does nothing but just create friction. And you're basically, you say yes to whatever sales is asking for. There's not really a marketing strategy. And I've seen it at the other end of the spectrum where they truly are go-to-market, one team go-to-market, one revenue minded. So it really depends on that leader.
I also think it depends on the brand maybe and where they are in their life cycle.
Yeah.
I could see, although, well, I'll say what I'm going to say and then we can go from there. I could see very, very early stage companies really having to determine, first and foremost, sales is key. And then how do we back in revenue? How do we back in marketing or vice versa? It doesn't matter, when it's that early stage. And then ultimately growing to need RevOps. And the flip side of that is if you just go for RevOps out of the chute, you're going to be that much further along when it comes to ultimately developing a sustainable business model that can be very, very successful. It's very interesting to take a look at some of the very, very large brands that have deployed big RevOps programs: Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Netflix, Delta, Chipotle, Uber, REI, the New York Shipping Exchange, these very, very large enterprise companies that now rely on RevOps modalities and methodologies to make sure that they're achieving top line and bottom line growth.
Yeah, it's really interesting as you look at that of like, what is the function of a RevOps group? So I used to be 100% against the concept of RevOps because having been a marketing executive, CMO, when I didn't have a dedicated marketing operations person, team, whatever it was, number one, my technology implementations always got delayed in favor of whatever sales was asking for. My analytics were always skewed to a sales point of view, et cetera. And so I was like, hey, let's keep it separate, because marketing is going to suffer because RevOps is just basically glorified sales ops that happens to have marketing in it. Or if it was RevOps, I would say, hey, you need to have at least a dedicated person on marketing ops as you go through that. But as organizations have matured, you still find that in a lot of places, honestly, as you see that. But the key on it is if they're truly looking at it under a go-to-market lens. What's the thing the go-to-market team needs most to accomplish this? How do these technologies work together? How do we get the data working together? And that's where it all starts to come together, because you're now pulling in all these contact records, all these interactivities, third-party data, first-party data. And sophisticated RevOps teams are now pumping all of that into like a data lake of some sort that then the business can do analytics out of as you go through that, as opposed to a sales point of view, a marketing point of view, a customer success point of view. You want a revenue point of view, but it depends on that leader and what they're seeing there. So I can understand why they're doing it, because there's so much data. We have to bring it together. But you also have to be aware of those potential biases and what's the lens that your leadership is looking at it through.
Yeah, and which is really the first part of our discussion today, is understanding the bias. And there's just so many different components of what bias could be. What are a few of the most common ones that you see?
Oh, So I'll give you a couple examples and just some of the things I've done to mitigate them too, frankly, because they come up so often. So I think the first one is just the always on. Marketing's doing a lot of work to generate leads. Those leads either aren't being followed up on or they're perceived as poor quality and things like that. We always see the finger pointing, right? Like sales isn't following up with my leads. That's why pipeline's short. That's why we're not going to hit our revenue target, or sales saying, hey, marketing's leads are garbage. And so that's why we're going to miss our pipeline target. Revenue, first and foremost, solves a multitude of those problems because then there's not finger pointing. So that's one where I've looked at it as kind of, hey, marketing leadership has a point of view they want to land. Sales has a point of view that they want to land as to why they're coming up. And this usually only comes up when there's a lot, like when there's friction, and frankly, you're usually missing your numbers. Otherwise, it's happy days. What I've started doing, and best practices I tend to recommend to clients and things along those lines as I've interacted over all the years and to friends, is first and foremost is actually what I call opportunity grading. And so one of the first things is just, hey, like, let's have an agreed upon ICP. You'd be amazed how many organizations even still struggle to have that between sales and marketing, not originated in marketing, but agreed upon between the two. Now from there, as we're getting meetings and leads and they're coming in and through that motion, I actually recommend that you have sales after that first meeting, give it a letter grade from A to F. Because what ends up happening, depending on your sales cycle timeline, is 3-6 months down the road, if that deal is lost for whatever reason, they might come back and say, oh, hey, marketing, that lead stunk. It wasn't good. Right as you go through that. And it's like, no, actually you give that an A or a B. And so you're actually able to start looking at that and saying holistically, earlier top of funnel, and saying, are these an ICP? Yes, no. And then based on the conversation, do we feel this is a legit opportunity? That's a great thing to have, because if you're missing the mark as marketing, you get that feedback earlier on, you can adjust. But if you wait 3 to 6 months down the road, you also have that kind of wall to hold sales accountable on. So that's one where I see it a lot. The other one where I see it happen a lot is in the sales side, of where they're trying to show just activity and follow up, and that they're going through and multi-threading and doing all the right things. But more often than not, marketing is kind of the one who has to go and audit it, is another interesting piece that I found, where I'll find a couple basic reports in sales that RevOps will pull, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It just shows hey, well, we did this and then they ghosted us. It's like, well, what were those interactions? What did that look like? Like, I had a company I worked for, and we were looking at this. We're like, we just keep losing, but the leads are good, right? Like, they're passing the letters grade, they're in the ICP. What's going on? And it took a RevOps deep dive to actually see what was happening there, because the sales didn't necessarily want it to come to life, or they didn't want to admit what was going on. And what we found was, on average, they were doing 2.3 touches post first meeting, and they were simple emails, right? So first I look at that and go, okay, maybe they're just ghosting it. And you look at the email. So there's like, hey, would it make sense to follow up after our last meeting? And then no communication of value or anything along those lines. And so as we dug through that, it was like, okay, so they're just sending 2.3 emails, no calls, no text, no nothing. There's zero communication of value. We're like, okay, well, let's dig into the meeting that they had. Wow. Well, the sales reps weren't actually following the prescribed sales methodology playbook of, like, do this, tee this up, secure this, the next thing, and this and that. And so, but yet the CRO didn't want to hear that.
Right.
You present all the data in the world, but now it's like, hey, my team's not doing their job. And even that language showed a bias, right? My team versus go-to-market team, as you go through that. So that's another one where I find it very often. And then even for sales leaders, the third one where I find it more often than not, where the bias exists, is you have a defined methodology that you're going through, like MedPick, Medic, whatever it is. And you have a flow that you're wanting your team to go through, but if they're not following it and you don't have a way to measure and monitor it, like another one I'll see is multi-threading very often. It's like, hey, sales rep, you're not multi-threading this account. But they're just waiting for people to kind of passively come in, even though that might be part of their playbook. And so if you don't have a RevOps function that can audit that and make sure that they're following it and doing the right things, very often they won't do it. And so you start to get these chunks of bias across the board as you're going through those different areas there. They kind of bubble up. Some are marketing specific, where it's like, hey, we're doing fluff and stuff marketing and we want credit. I've had those to sales isn't doing their job. And where's the truth? And that's where you need that unified function to help you find that.
It's interesting as you're providing those examples, um, and I'm making a bit of an assumption, but with the examples you provided, my ears peaked a little bit because there didn't seem to be a lot of personalization in the approach that they were taking. How important is personalization from a sales follow-up standpoint?
I mean, and now and nowadays, I think consumers, and I say that in context of B2B, I think they expect it no matter what,
Yeah.
right? If you're just sending a canned out of the box email, there's enough technology out there that people kind of expect it. And if in particular, if you're a seller and you're doing, I mean, unless you're doing super crazy high volume deals, um, take the time, right? Like
Well,
pull out the nuggets.
that's just it. I mean, Dear Frank is one thing from a
Yeah.
personalization, but Dear Frank, I hope that you enjoyed your weekend, on the Carolina Beach last weekend, blah, 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 based on the fact that they'd already met with them. That's where I see just a lot of what we call slam dunk emails that are literally the dunk. You can tell that it's just a cut and paste.
Yeah.
It got no personalization at all, except for the name, which is no longer considered personalization in my book. It's a given. It's really taking it the extra mile.
Well, it's the best sellers I've come across. Take the time to like set up a Google alert for the accounts that they're looking at, or they're using intelligence tools like a Zoom
Yeah.
Info or a Sixth Sense to say, like, and they're focused on delivering value.
Yeah.
Right. As they go through that of just like, hey, saw this and it made me thought of you. Maybe it's a personal thing of like a band that they mentioned, or like, oh my gosh, I got to see this great folk band this weekend with my, my buddies, and they happen to know you like, right? Like you find that personal side, and then you're also trying to deliver value on the business side. And that's how you start to build that relationship and build preference going through that. And you then tie it in where they're wanting to interact with you along those lines versus it's just a transactional email. And frankly, they're getting a lot of those from a lot of different vendors.
And we're talking lower volume situations right now. I read there's a great publication, RevOps Advisor, and I was reading a story in there, and Reddit rather eliminated a data block. They get hundreds of millions of visitors each month, which would be absolutely impossible to track each one of those. They use a variety of business intelligence and analytics tools to increase their efficiency. Before Reddit started using its current BI system, employees wasted a lot of time trying to handle data-related requests and making sense of all that was collected on the website. So they adopted a tool by the name of Chartio. And that tool allowed them to quickly analyze large amounts of data, and identify the current trends that may have been bubbling up within their tools and product line in general. That to me is what we're talking about as well. So on the one hand, you've got a smaller organization that can personalize, but then you've got a Reddit with a gazillion questions and answers every day. And, how can they possibly manage that?
Yeah, it's funny. You're bringing back a long time ago before all these fun Gen AI tools existed. But when AI existed, when I was at Microsoft, we had a data science team, small group. I think it was 5 people at the time. Their sole job was to go out and look at all the data that we had coming in and to figure out what data sets had significance together, to bring it together so that then the data science teams from the business units, the marketing teams across all of them could go out and say, oh, cool, these ones work together. And then they could do their experimentation, but they weren't spending their time figuring out what was significant, because what we found was that it was like 80% of the data science team's time was simply just trying to figure out the data that should and could talk to each other and actually had relevance. That was pre all this fun tools that now we have that do a lot of this for us as you go through it. But I always, even with these, like to start with the business questions that you're asking. Like, what is it that I need to answer that I could do my job better? Because very often we'll start with just what's the data that we have and what can it tell us versus the other way around of what's the question I'm trying that would really help me and how can the data help inform that. Two different starting points there. But Gen AI is going to make a lot of this stuff really accessible in the near future, where you're just going to be able to type in your question and get an unbiased answer back.
Wow. Without hallucinations, hopefully.
Oh, well, that's a whole nother thing at some
Yeah,
point.
exactly. I know. So we've talked a little bit about aligning teams for success and measurement. And you've got a lot of people are all about, MQL, MQL, MQL. You want to shift the mindset of an MQL to a binding committee to affect the team performance and measurement. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think when you say buyer, a lot of our brains go straight to an individual person. But in most purchases, especially in the B2B world, rarely is it going to be a single individual making the purchasing decision. And the bigger the deals go, the bigger the buying committees typically get. And that a buyer is a group of people then in that instance, and they all have different points of view. And especially in the current world, where CFOs are looking at everything, right? You've got multiple stakeholders, multiple opinions. You've got squeaky wheels they're an influencer, but they can torpedo your deal. You've got a lot of different people that you need to kind of get around the table. And so I like to look at this as kind of like either a marketing qualified account where you've got 3, 4, 5 people of the right personas, right? Of the right people around the table as you go through that. I'm forgetting where the research is from, but recently there was a report out that it's a lot easier to, and this is what we call multi-threading. It's a lot easier to multi-thread earlier in a deal than it is later in a deal. And the reason is that your 1 to 2 people you're working with through the sales process might now take offense when you try to reach out beyond them, right? You're taking away control from them versus when you're earlier in a deal cycle. You and I can have that meeting, and then I can look up your boss or a peer and say, hey, had a great conversation with so and so, thought you might find it insightful, would love to chat if this is interesting to you, right? Like I can start to round that out. And so that's where I think marketing and sales and that coming together in the modern buying environment is really key. It's not about getting the one lead that's the primary contact on the opportunity. It's about bringing together the right people to drive that deal through the purchasing journey, and their needs change. Like when I was in the BPO space, one of our biggest potential blockers was the CISO, the security teams at these massive enterprises that you all have heard of. And so we looked at that and said, okay, this is where deals are getting stuck. Again, this is having an unbiased view on the pipeline, just saying, where does stuff fall down? Let's look at it and what can we do about it? And we found that that's where a lot of our deals were either getting stuck or we were losing them. And so I went back and said, well, what can we do there? Well, our CISO had won the Cyber Defense Magazine CISO of the Year award. We had FedRAMP JAB, which is like the DoD level certifications and all this kind of stuff. Like we had a great security story, but it just wasn't coming out. And we had to install these deals because then we had to educate this whole group on it. So we actually shifted in having a campaign targeting the security teams of these companies the stage before we knew they typically would engage. And it shortened that sales cycle because they already were learning about us. We weren't unfamiliar by the time they were plugging in. They'd seen some of our credentials. And so it actually started to help with that kind of stuff. And so as you start to look through that, that's where a great RevOps function can actually say, hey, here are the critical people we need around the table. Here's some nice to haves. Here's frankly probably who we don't want to have around the table. When do they come into these deals and how can we start to address them? And that's where kind of building these journeys out. Marketing can really help early on, partnering with SDRs to then start to round out those committees, because most of this data I've seen around it, your win rates go up 20, 30% when you're multi-threaded with 4+ individuals around that account versus just passively waiting for sales or saying, my champion would go in, we're having meetings, and I hope that you invite the other people along the way. You can facilitate that as a brand.
These optimizations, which you're talking about, are absolutely key. How often do you find an issue that seemingly people are looking at, not as an issue, and then I guess what is the recipe for having to take a deep dive into into the operation itself so that you can optimize it? Is it just something that you methodically look at every month and try to uncover things, or does it have to get to the point that it's something larger and then you're having to backtrack?
So hopefully you don't have to wait for it to get larger. Unfortunately, often that's what gives it enough of a, so many eyes are on it, you start to focus on it as you go through it. What I like to recommend people do is on a quarterly basis, you are looking at, or by cohort, kind of lead opportunity cohorts, another way to look at it. I had a great CFO who kind of really lived by cohorts, and I've become a bigger fan of him since then. It's like, hey, everything we generated in January, what's the status of that? Everything in this, so that you're actually looking at like a group at any given time. But on a regular basis, typically a quarter, I like to look and to say what's going on stage by stage. And I look at a couple different metrics. Duration, how long is it sitting in there? Conversion rate, stage to stage, and then also deal size, right? Are we seeing particular things shrink down, et cetera, as you go through that? And you look for the sticky points. It's like, where are conversions not that great? Where do we seem to just stall out? And then we ask why. What's going on in that section? And that's when then you start to do your deep dives into that. It's like, okay, for the deals that are sitting here where we seem to see this, usually you'll find a line. Like one of the, we found 3 lines, and I had a whole thing called the morning coffee dashboard we built out with our RevOps team. And for the sales view of it, we had their unloved opportunities. Well, the 3 things we found when deals fell off a cliff were lack of communication and contact past 2 weeks. So if they hadn't had any activities on it in over 2 weeks, if they didn't know enough about the op to put a product on it, and a specific product, that was another one. And then if it sat in a stage more than 90 days. And so we would basically say, hey, here are all your things that have kind of passed the first threshold of like blinking lights. Like these are approaching, these deals are going to fall off a cliff and die. We would set that up. And so that way the sales reps like, before you go tell me you need more pipeline, any of this, like take care of what is yours. And we had those metrics on it. And so we'd continue to look at those on like that quarterly basis. And then like the product marketing and content team would go and say, what could we do? And the best teams that I've come across, they'll actually start to, the marketing teams, content teams will start listening to calls at those stages and listen to hear like, what are the objections? Why would someone not purchase right now? And then you're actually able to piecemeal all those great pieces together, put them into like a platform or something that then surfs that up to your sales reps to help them unstick it. But kind of that quarterly basis to make sure that you're identifying the friction points, you can make a few actions and implement, given enough time to run a little bit of water through the pipe, look at it again and move forward.
How often is message framing the simple answer to marketing really stepping in and providing something that can fix an issue?
I think there's not an easy answer to that one. I think it's a mix, right? Why is someone not wanting to move forward? Why won't they buy today? It can be sometimes they don't know what they don't know, right? They're afraid that they're missing something as you're going through this, right? There's something, there's going to be a gotcha here, and I don't know what it is, and so I need to keep digging around in it. And so that's where messaging can help, or providing analyst reports and third-party stuff to say, hey, like, you're not going to get fired for picking our company because we're the best, and that's according to Gartner or Forrester, right? Or it can be, I believe you, but I'm not sure that we can be successful with it. So how do you de-risk that? How do you give them a chance to try it, see success, and move forward? Matt Dixon had a great book recently called The Jolt Effect that kind of goes into this, like, fear of messing up is a bigger fear than missing out. And a lot of companies still go with this like 10% discount at the end of the year, or right end of the quarter, whatever that is. And that actually is worse for a deal cycle typically. Because what you're doing with that messaging is it's like, hey, do we truly clearly understand what makes us different and why someone would find that valuable? And does this particular company person, does this matter to them? And so marketing messaging can help land that, can help frame the landscape, can help with fear, uncertainty, doubt of competitors as you go through that. So there's a lot of different things you can do along those lines, but there's also just sales motion and other things you can do in that process. Contracting details, points, proofs of concept, all kinds of other things in there too. And that's where you want to look at it, not just as marketing, looking at kind of where is stuff getting stuck, but you want to look at it as one team go to market.
What is the most common marketing issue that causes a strong rev op to bottleneck?
It's a really good question. So I think there's kind of two things. I think one where you run into it a lot is in the vein of marketing's messaging is to marketing is probably the right way to say it, where it just isn't using the real voice of the market. It's not using customer language. And so sales is having to be an interpreter through that process as you go through it. I've also kind of made it best practice, like sales is my number one client because I can't force them to use it. I had a big old argument with a brand person one time, where I won't say the company or the tagline, but it was like generic word, generic word, generic word are differentiators. And I was like, really? Like, really? So I went to the sales team and I was like, hey, so-and-so saying these are our different, like, yeah, no, these are the three things. I was like, cool. And I talked to like sales engineering, like the technical specialists that know where people lean in. And I went back to the brand person. They just done this like $500,000 rebrand. And I was like, so sales isn't going to use your messaging or any of that stuff. And like, they have to. The founder and CEO signed off on it. And this, and I was like, I kind of feel like they were just giving you lip service to get you out of their meeting. And sales is going to do what sales is going to do to be successful. And so like that marketing message, like you've got to make sure it's something sales wants to use. Sometimes you have to educate them on why you might be saying something and they'll buy in on it, like if you're trying to establish a market or own a particular phrase, but you got to make sure it's something they're going to use. So marketing messaging can have significant impact and be a big gap often. The other times, the other big miss that's not messaging related, and I love to ask this question of SDR leaders and sales leaders, is saying, hey, you believe if you're not following up with my leads in marketing that we're generating for you, that tells me you believe that you're going to have better success picking from a list of accounts that has been assigned to you for some reason and just cold calling these people. Maybe you have an existing relationship. That's a reasonable thing. But outside of that, you think you're just going to have a blind better chance at that than following up on a lead that has visited our website, downloaded some content, right? Gotten some emails. So why is that, right? Why do you believe? Because sellers, in all my experience, are point operated, and that's what they're paid to do, right? Like they're going to get to their quota the easiest, fastest way that they think they can. All right. They're not necessarily going to go above and beyond on any of that kind of stuff. And that's fine. That's how we program them. That's their comp structure. So if that's what's happening, why? And a lot of marketers don't take the time to ask that because I think they're afraid of the answer is like your stuff's completely out of left field. And so I'm better just starting without having to undo the marketing message a little bit there. So it's an interesting vein, but that messaging component is really key, but then you need the data behind it to see where it's breaking down.
Well, and oh my gosh, this is such, I think, kind of a bone of contention for me when it comes to very, very seasoned marketers pushing out content that is all about what it does and how it works.
Feature function.
Versus why one should really care, which is the behavioral side and what we refer to as people first side. So it's all about how this will benefit, how it will change their life, how they can, get more done, whatever it might be, changing a habit. And I've never, you always have to approach these situations with a lot of delicate direction. And I've never really understood, is it, that CEO, engineer, founder, bioscience founder, who's just really insistent upon feature forward? Or is it, a marketing person that just does not have the savvy to do what is right? I mean, you just brought forward an example of obviously a very, very large enterprise organization that spent $500,000 on something that was not usable.
Yeah.
It happens a lot.
A lot more often than you would think.
Yeah. We could talk about that point for quite a while, but those of you that are listening, the most important thing is you want to be successful. There's a reason why the tenure of marketing folks is so short. Messaging is not the only thing, but really be able to stand up to the CEO and let them know what the right recipe is in order to create success is half the battle.
And that's where having the data, and actually there's a difference between data and insight, right? Like you can make data honestly say pretty much anything you want. You can frame it, you can adjust your graphs and charts. There are ways to make it always tell kind of a rosy picture. And that's where like having like the real insight with a great team that's backed, right? Because I've had CEOs be like, well, where'd this data come from? It's like, well, it came from Salesforce. It was pulled by this team and it's been looked at by this person, right? I'm now building my credibility argument to go have this tough conversation with them. Then the other thing I've learned that you need to augment this with is voice of the market. You need to have talked with some analysts potentially on the point of view. If you've got relationships with those and get that, you want to be listening to calls. So then you can reference active deal cycles where certain things might be popping up. That's one of the biggest things I find where marketers lack credibility is sales will be able to be like, well, I saw this in these 3 deals. Let me list them off really quick. And it was like, yeah, me too. And marketing can never give those examples back. And so that's where combining those 3 things of like, here's where the data is, the insight that we're seeing, and kind of who's validated that point of view, like third party, and then that, like your active market. And then you bring that as a holistic package to the CEO of like, here's what we're seeing. This is what the data says. This is what we're hearing from the market, and the analysts back it up. Sometimes you don't need that analyst piece depending on your CEO. Sometimes you do, because then it's a don't fire me. I'm not the only one saying this type thing. But you've got to bring those different points of view together. Marketers often struggle with that, and sales is able to. They get 2 of those every single day, right? They're looking at their pipeline numbers and they're talking to customers.
Well, and what you're talking about from insights reminded me of this quote. I mean, an insight leads to a great strategy, right? Sometimes with the data, you just, take it and do something, very, very different downstream, but you're really not taking that insight and learning from it. Tactics score points, strategies win games.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here, right? What we're talking about are the insights that can lead to better strategies, that are going to lead to better tactics, that are going to, win the game. And it's just not looked at. A lot of people are afraid of strategy.
Yeah.
They are so. I've got incredible people on my team, and I tell you, every single one of them is a tactical wizard. There is no doubt about it. But those, there are those that can implement the strategy, and then there are those that can really help develop the strategy. You need both. But I don't think that the strategy development is something, is a deep enough discussion in a lot of these, these boardrooms.
Well, and it's a lot of boardrooms are kind of stuck in that old MQL world, and they're not thinking as a one team go to market. I talk with presidents and CEOs who still want first touch, last touch attribution on things. And it's like, think about your own just consumer world. Like Wall Street Journal released a thing not too long ago on how like if you're buying a big purchase, you'll look at it on your phone, but then you'll actually go to your desktop because it's a considered purchase and you want to make sure you're getting it right. And you search on Google and then you're retargeting on Facebook and you see it there, and then you might check some forum. Like what we do just in our consumer world to buy like a projector or a car, right? Or whatever it is, we're doing a ton of our own research. We're influenced by Gen AI search results now. We're hitting our communities. We're hit by multiple ads, et cetera. And that's just our consumer world. Now take that to a $1 million B2B SaaS product. You think the Google search that they happen to click and request a demo is the thing that moved the needle, that closed the whole deal, right? That we should stop everything else. Now, the problem is a lot of marketers lack the ability and the data to actually look at it and do, I'm not going to say a whole attribution model, but even just at the minimum being able to say, hey, this group of tactics seem to be things that show up when we win. These ones never seem to show up. We should probably stop doing these ones. And a lot of marketers don't even have that level of insight, but you've got to go through and we as marketers did ourselves a disservice, slamming the MQL for so long because now everybody believes it. But now we want to shift to this concept of like this qualified account and multi-threading and right all these touches and getting people to do the accounts. I think um, Snowflake does a really, really good job of this, where they on their quarter, like every quarter, every 6 months, they'll say, here are the target accounts. And they work at one team, go to market, SDRs and marketing. They say, is this group of accounts doing the things we want them to do? So out of these, how many has marketing engaged, not engaged? How many of these is marketing and SDRs engaged? Just marketing, just SDRs, and no one. And it just starts to go down funnel, but it's just the simple question of, are the accounts I care about doing the things I want them to do? And heading down the funnel. And that's like, it's simple, but it's also complex to measure and show that as you go through that. And we've got a lot of boardrooms that are stuck at this tactical, show me that Google search click did the thing.
Yeah. I want to shift focus for a minute and talk about AI. AI is providing incredible insights in order for us, I think, to become smarter. The wisdom, is always going to be here, but those insights that we can gain through AI tools, many of them, is phenomenal. We're actually building a tool right now. We've got a customer with 15,000 reviews on how many, umpteen number of review sites. And we have built a custom chat. We were able to pull all 15,000 reviews in, built the custom chat. You can go in and ask a question, and then it spits out, the data to you. That's the beta portion. As we've been using it in beta, we realized that it's bringing forward data that might be 10 years old. So we have to timestamp, like if there was a problem 10 years ago, is that problem still existing today, so that we can, understand that. And at the same time, if it was such a huge problem and there is a mention or two of it today, then we still have a perception management issue, right?
Right.
So all these incredible insights that we're gaining through tools like this and really building it for our clients.
Yeah.
What role do you see AI playing in the sales process?
I think we've been trying to do it for a long time. We've done things like People AI, ingesting all the contacts and just getting those onto an opportunity record. Hey, here's everybody who's touching this. I think we've seen tools like sales enablement software trying to recommend the next best content, right, that a seller should show. I think where we're going to head over time is we're kind of seeing Microsoft and other people do this with Copilot and some stuff, and nobody's doing it great just yet. But I think where it's going to get to is going to be like, hey, you're missing these fundamental people in the deal from a multi-threading perspective. Yeah, you should do these next steps, like listening to the call, looking at the state of the industry, actively consuming the news that's out there, understanding all your product content and stuff that's available, and then basically kind of potentially telling your seller what to do, because we still people want to interact with people as we go through that, but saying, hey, you should send the CFO something about this. We think it'll, it understands her social profiles and things like that. We think that this will help open the door for your conversation with her. And it's like, it could tell you that, and it drafts the email and says, actually, she prefers a phone call over an email. Like, I think it's going to get there. The question, there's privacy issues. It'll get there in the US before it gets there probably anywhere in Europe. But there's just this interesting nugget of like, we've got all of this data coming in, but no one's overly piecing it all together in context of a journey, and then let alone a sales methodology on top of that. So it's an interesting piece. You look at like just your simple use case that would have taken hours and hours and hours, right? Somebody would have had to have read through all 15,000 of those reviews, tagged, categorized, all that stuff. AI can do that in seconds, minutes, right?
Yeah.
Then you start to piecemeal all these different things together and what is possible. And it could basically create a completely personalized contextual journey that is guiding the sales rep every step of the way. Number one, they still got to follow it, which we struggle with. But I also think we're a ways off from that, because there's so many disparate companies that have attacked little pieces of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's truly, I had a biz dev meeting last week, could not find any information on this individual via Google. None. And I was like, okay. So I went to Perplexity and I went to chat and I said, please provide me the entire background on this individual. And, quite frankly, they both came up with very, very good answers, but great information, the insights that I needed for sure. But then chat, I asked it to take it one step further. And I said, please provide me insights on how best to interact with this individual based on discussions that he's had in podcast, in interviews, what are his passion points, so on and so forth. And I found out so much more about him that way. And it really helped me fine-tune the sort of questions I was going to ask in the meeting. And that to me is very rudimentary. That's just, a day-to-day system that anyone can subscribe to, not these, AI systems that are providing incredible solutions, based on something very, very vertical.
What's interesting is, though, most people today wouldn't have the context or the thinking to ask the secondary question, which is where I think there's a lot of opportunity for, I'll say, marketers, but especially younger marketers kind of getting in. Is like, you hear the whole concept of prompt engineering and this and that. There's truth to that, but like also just thinking about what's the next thing I could ask or would like to know, and just starting to build on that and bringing those things back. Some of the best sellers I know use it like nonstop. And they're using it to tailor their follow-ups, as we talked about earlier. They're using it to find nuggets of information that they could share that would deliver value. And then they're even using it to ingest their call logs and like do those things. Even they're breaking company policy sometimes, but they're doing what they need to do to win. And that's the smart ones as they're going through that. But as you think about what's possible over time as these systems start talking to each other, that's where I think the magic's going to happen. But I think we're a ways off from it, both from a trust perspective, just people knowing how to do it thing. Because to your comment, what you just did there was very rudimentary. However, I would probably say 80% of the market wouldn't do that and wouldn't know to do that.
Yeah, I love it. Final advice. So it's all about optimization. It's all about taking what is and what can be really with RevOps. Final advice for our listeners and viewers today on the one thing they must implement in the next 24, 72 hours to make sure that they're running efficiently.
Trying to think what you could implement that quick.
Or at least talk about it. At least have it on the table.
Talk about. I think the most important one, I'll give you two, because I think it depends where you are in your sales and your maturity. The first is just going to be, do you have that stage to stage conversion deal cycle timeline? Can you actually map that out and find the points of friction in your sales process and back that all the way up into your lead funnel and things along those lines? Because if you can't answer those questions where things are leaking out, what's going on, you can pour as much as you want to the top of the funnel, but if it's just stalling out, you're overwhelming your team, whatever's going on, you're going to be inefficient. The second, if you're a marketer and maybe you have that stuff, is that lead or that opportunity grading, which is just putting that in there as a quick line of feedback to say, yes, is it in ICP? Yes, no. But then based on the meeting that was had with your seller, how would they rate that and why? And make them answer the why behind it, because you're not going to get that from just data. You need that as contextual elements there. The bonus one that I would add into this would be, take a hard look at your RevOps organization and try to identify, does it have a bias? And that is the bias lean towards sales? Does it bias lean towards marketing? You're usually not. And then for some of the better organizations I'm starting to see, they're actually having it report into like the CFO or the COO, because I just want to see what the data says. And then let's talk about it, versus a defensive posture from either organization. But at a minimum, is there a bias that leans one way or the other? And try to identify that and just be able to call that out. Because otherwise we'll stick around in this finger pointing culture for forever. And I would love to get past it.
Yeah, I would too. Jeff, you have been amazing. What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best. Shoot me a DM on there if you want. I think even in my contact info, there's my cell. So if you want to text me, just reference this and let me know. Otherwise, I don't tend to answer your phone numbers. I don't know. So to all USDRs who are going to follow up on that, shoot me a text first.
And if you want to get a hold of me, please email me, Lori@strategycast.com. And don't forget to sign up for the StrategyCast newsletter at strategycast.com as well. We're going to have an entire feature on this episode. Jeff Marcoux, thank you so much for your appearance on.
Thanks for having me on. This was tons of fun.
It sure was. Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.